What are some of the reasons that companies would leave the cloud?
So the number one reason that I think that they listed is basically cost.
Hmm.
So, for example, they have to have a team of people who are constantly analyzing when they were in AWS or wherever they were, analyze the cost structures, make sure that things are operating optimally. And even though like Jeff Bezos invested in Basecamp or 37 Signals, even though they have the ear of him a lot of times, and they're getting super reduced rates, they're still spending gobs and gobs of money on it.
Hmm.
So there's management time involved, whereas maybe you don't have to do as much as the nitty gritty technical work. But really, they already had people that were able to do some of that technical work.
Right. And that's one of the things that I not only that I saw in his article, but I see that where I work now. You're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul there. Yeah, I don't have to have the hardware management in-house, but now I have to have the cloud infrastructure management in-house, because it's not like I can just turn everything over to AWS. We run on some AWS, and we've got teams of
Or
people that do nothing but deal with that.
or if you want to do that, be prepared to pay through the nose because
Right.
they're not going to optimize your stuff running on there for you because
Hmm.
it's to their benefit for you to be, no offense, to be running in an unoptimized state, so you pay a bigger bill.
Right.
So
So,
they had to invest a lot of time in order to optimize it,
yeah,
reduce their spend.
right. And so when would you benefit? Well, I mean, the question on cost of when you would benefit is, if you're a smaller company, you probably get more benefit out of going to the cloud because you're trading off expensive IT management functionality for less expensive um, cloud management. But there will come a tipping point where your cloud infrastructure is so complex that you are spending more money on that now than you would if you had it in house. So I'd say on the cost factor, it kind of depends on the size of um, the company and what you can afford to bring in house.
Yeah, so I was looking at this, and in terms of the benefits of leaving the cloud or whatever, it's like when you're first starting out, relying on someone to manage the servers and a lot of the infrastructure, I guess relying more on services, I think helps you move faster and you don't have to learn as much to get started. Meaning, like, instead of setting up your Postgres database yourself, you get RDS.
Right.
Instead of setting up your own Nginx HA proxy load balancer, you just click a button and say add Amazon load balancer. Instead of setting up an Nginx server or a Caddy server to receive traffic and get it configured and SSL certs and all of that kind of stuff, you use CloudFront. So
Mm-hmm.
you use services in these providers, and that is a much more inexpensive way to get up and started.
Right.
Inexpensive because one, you don't have to have all that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You just be a developer and just kind of click around and do things. Or, I'm talking about the big ones, but even like um uh, sure, I'll get back to that in a second. But you don't have to invest the knowledge. And then two, the costs are ridiculously low when you don't have that much going on, when you have smaller servers.
Right. Yeah, because trying to front load the hardware and the cost of that hardware is, I mean, that's a big expense if you want to get the hardware yourself. Whereas renting space on somebody else's hardware is much less expensive up front.
Yeah, like for example, um, yeah, I'm not ready to quote unquote leave AWS because my costs have not reached that tipping point.
Yeah.
I'll go back to that in a second. But what you have to think about is if you want to leave, one, you have to have the knowledge. Do you have the knowledge to be able to set up all of these things yourself or use tools that help do that, like Ansible or Terraform or things of that nature? Do you have sufficient knowledge to get those set up and set them up securely? And two, the expense of paying for co-location facilities, because
Mm-hmm.
they are paying for a part of a rack. You're talking, you're probably going to want to have it in at least two different locations, because it's easy as pie to set up a server in one availability zone in AWS and a server in another availability zone, and then have them, like if you're talking databases, replicate data across. So if one whole availability zone goes down, you still have all your data. Well, you'll probably want to mimic that
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So you're talking probably two co-location facilities. So you have to have part of a rack in each one. And I was looking at some costs, and you're probably talking for the co-location alone at least 500, if not $1,000, to have space for a couple of servers and two co-location hosting areas. And I was literally Googling a fun, interesting thing. I was literally Googling cheap co-location facilities, and I saw Joe's data center. I'm like, I
Oh
love
boy.
that.
I can just imagine this little oak plank shack on the beach somewhere with a couple of servers in it.
No, but it has a little picture of it, and they're in Kansas City. I'm like, okay, I get that. Joe just went out and started a business doing server hosting. That's pretty awesome. So, so 500,000, probably minimal $1,000 for just having the servers, and then you need to buy the servers, or you can still lease them. And, you're talking so many grand. So I would think you would want to be, I think, in order to make the switch to it yourself, ignoring knowledge base, but just to get servers set up in a co-location, paying for it with sufficient bandwidth and power to run something, I think you got to have at least $2,000 a month in the budget as a minimum, is my opinion.
Well, yeah. Well, not to mention the fact that you actually have to have the capital to purchase the hardware in the first place.
No, you can lease them. You can lease them
Well,
so
I mean,
that with the
I
monthly
guess you
payment,
could, but
yeah, so you can rent them just like you're renting from AWS, but with a premium.
so Seb says, do you observe increased interest of leaving the cloud across companies after 37 Signals announced they are going to do it? I haven't personally observed that. I've
Yeah,
I've observed more conversation around what it means to be in the cloud, but I haven't seen a bunch of companies jumping ship on that because it's a big investment.
they already invested all this money to get into the cloud.
Right.
Now you want me to leave?
Yeah, and honestly, I mean so cost is kind of an easy thing to objectify, right? I can see exactly what I'm spending. I can compare it to what I would spend if I was doing co-location. And I can probably, if I'm a company that big, I can probably have a pretty reasonable estimation of how much I'm going to spend on internal bringing that stuff in house and the man hours I'm going to have to use for that versus the man hours I have to use to manage the cloud stuff, right? So I suspect that the cost thing is an argument that can be made, but there's a lot of other things that are just costs that are kind of hidden from the front end things. Like for instance, what do you do with all the people who you've hired who are AWS specialists and they are really, really good at running cloud infrastructures, but they've never run in-house infrastructures or set up actual physical servers before or done that kind of stuff, and they're used to AWS. you've got to there's retraining that's going to be involved. I don't care how good they are. It's a different environment, so you've got to learn new stuff there. So there's retraining involved. There's the time to actually convert that stuff over. Then you've got could potentially have business interruptions as you're doing the conversions and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's not just like, hey, I want to drop the cloud, let's go buy some servers. It's a big deal. And if you're even thinking about this thing, you're probably a fairly large business where you're talking about millions of dollars of costs involved. I can't imagine like a small shop saying, yeah, it's time for us to leave the cloud. I don't see them getting to a tipping point like that. It's just not worth it.
It doesn't have to be millions of dollars either. I'm saying, I think you can start experience. I think it is around like a $2,000 a month is when I think you could, where I think it might be the tipping point, $2,000 to $3,000 a month in expenses on one of the cloud providers at which you could go off and perhaps do it at the same cost or a little bit less. And then the benefits accrue from there.
Maybe. I'm not. Yes, at a $2,000 a month book cost, you could probably start seeing some savings because that's offset by the difference in hosting prices versus co-location prices and that kind of stuff. But if you're a small shop, even if you're at the mark of $2,000 a month that you're spending on hosting, you still have to take into consideration all those things that you were talking about before, where, okay, now I have to get all this management that I don't have the payroll for.
You have to have the knowledge base. If you don't have the knowledge base, then yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, even if you personally have the knowledge, you also need 30 hours a day to do all that stuff.
Well, you need but you need more than one person.
Yeah.
That can do the operations.
Right.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I can't see a smaller shop getting a lot of, well, all right. So let's say we're a shop that does maybe a total of $1 million in gross revenue a year, right? I don't think we're going to be at a level where my costs for cloud hosting would come close to what it would cost me to bring stuff in-house, even with co-location.
Yeah, I think from the I think because I agree with you on that from the personnel perspective. Because if you're going to be doing this yourself, like running your own servers, you're going to need redundancy in not
Right.
only the knowledge, but redundancy of that knowledge in at least 2 or 3 people that know what's going on.
Right. And you are...
Because AWS, you can buy support contracts. Of course, those can get pricey as well. But I'm just saying, you can pay for all of that on there. And again, when you're small, the cost is not as significant.
Right. And so, yeah, and I was also reading an article on this earlier today, and it's written by a company that's, I think, trying to sell on-site services for stuff. So, of course, they're going to be a bit biased, but they were talking about the different reasons why you might want to leave the cloud. And one of the things that they brought up were security issues and regulatory compliance issues, which, okay, it makes kind of sense. Okay, so the regulatory compliance thing can be a factor if you're a really big company doing financial stuff. You might be better off bringing some things in-house than having them in the cloud. Or you're going to have to spend a lot of money to make sure things are secure in the cloud. The security issues, I'm not sure I'm sold on, because I don't see how having stuff in-house would be any more secure than having stuff at AWS, unless you have your own white hat security team
Yeah, you
Uh,
got to have a lot of, if you have regulatory things, if you have high security considerations, I would think then it's going to be even longer before you can leave the cloud because they've done so much work to, achieve those, whoops, achieve those regulations or what's the term? Comply with those regulations
right.
and
'Cause-
achieve HIPAA compliance and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, like PCI compliance is not, it's what, a 400-page document or some full PCI compliance. It's insanely complex. You don't want to take that in-house unless you've got an entire team of people that can do just nothing but that.
Or you outsource that portion, and this is the cost judgment.
Right.
Do we pay AWS to do it all, or do we hire this third party, Frank's PCI services, and he comes in and does the compliance and audits for you and whatnot
Right.
on your own infrastructure?
So, they were talking about that stuff and I'm like, I'm not buying that because it's, And then one of the things they said is no access to bleeding edge hardware.
I thought that was the
what is
point.
Yeah, I mean, these cloud companies are replacing the hardware all the time, but
Well, nah. Well, a lot of
but
times they're long in the tooth.
yeah, but still, if it does what I need it to do, what does bleeding edge hardware buy me? Unless I'm doing like online gaming or something where I need, heavy duty graphics processors or something. I don't get that.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, I agree that you can get yourself better hardware at a better price if you're buying it
Sure.
yourself.
Sure. Well, better price for the hardware itself, but then you have to factor in the costs of the management and
Oh yeah, yeah, but I'm
right.
saying that hardware argument, I buy that.
So I think, listing out all these reasons why you might want to leave the cloud, any one of them in isolation may be pretty convincing. But if you start looking at it as a holistic thing, I don't think there's going to be a lot of companies where it would make sense. Now,
Well,
37 Signals, it made sense, and he was able to justify all the reasons. But that's 37 Signals is not a typical company.
well, every company, large, well, I would say every medium company that I interact with as a consultant, they're constantly talking about and wary of AWS costs. So I know that is
Well,
a
sure.
pain that's out there. If you like this clip and want to watch another one, you can click right here. Or if you want to watch the full video, you can click here.